My brother trashed my 8-year-old at dinner, so I cut off his help overnight. He mocked my son, so I pulled the STEM program I paid for. He ranted online, but he never expected what my son's drawing would do to him. If this story pulled you in, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. I should have known dinner was going to be a disaster. The second my mom asked if we could all eat together like the old days. The old days when my brother could mock me over meatloaf and no one said a word because that's just how he was. And the old days when I didn't have the nerve to clap back. But things are different now. I'm a single mom with a good job in tech, and I've been carrying more weight than anyone at that table wanted to admit. My brother Dan, the oldest, has been between jobs for over a year. His wife works part-time at a salon, and I've been quietly paying for their daughter's after-school STEM program, groceries when EBT runs out, even their car insurance 1 month. Not because I'm a saint, just because I thought family meant something. So when Dan turned to me during dinner, Mom made lasagna his favorite and said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Your kid will never be anything but average. Be happy if he finishes high school." It was like the air left the room. Everyone laughed. Everyone but me and my son Jordan. He's 8, quiet, maybe a little socially awkward, but the smartest kid I know. He just stared at his plate while the adults giggled like it was a roast and not a hit job on an 8-year-old. I didn't think, I just said it. "Then I'll stop paying for your daughter's after-school program." Dan blinked like he didn't understand the words at first. My mom whispered, "Don't do this here." But I did because I've learned something about silence. It protects the wrong people. So I kept going, I laid it out. Every dollar I given them in the last 12 months, every time I picked up the slack without saying a word, everyone went quiet. My sister-in-law turned pale. My niece looked confused. Dan said nothing, but his jaw tightened. I looked at my son still staring at his food. We left early that night. I emailed the program director and pulled my funding. I figured if Dan thought Jordan was such a lost cause, he'd have no problem pulling miracles out of thin air for his own kid. It was petty, I know that, but I also know what it feels like to swallow humiliation in front of your own child. I didn't think things would unravel so fast, but they did. And not just for him, for all of us. 3 days after that dinner, Dan sent me a text. "Really classy, Amanda. Real mature, that was it. No apology, no explanation, like I'd somehow been the villain for not smiling through his insult." I didn't reply. A week later, my mom called, said my niece had been pulled from her after-school STEM program. She said it like I'd set the house on fire, like I was the problem, not the grown man who humiliated a child at dinner. I told her I was done helping people who thought it was funny to mock my son in front of me. She hung up. I figured that was the end of it, but it wasn't. Apparently, the after-school program wasn't just a place to keep my niece busy. It was the centerpiece of her scholarship application for a private school. She'd already been through the interview process. Her parents had told her she was a shoo-in. Without that program listed, her application got kicked back. Just like that, Dan's wife, Carly, called me from a number I didn't recognize. I didn't answer the first time. The second time I picked up, she was crying, said they didn't know what to tell their daughter, said I'd ruined everything. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just said, maybe Dan should have thought about that before he opened his mouth at dinner. She went quiet. I hung up. That same night, Dan went full high school on Facebook. Posted some vague rant about family members who get a little money and think they're better than everyone. Made it sound like I was on some power trip swinging my wallet around. What he didn't expect was that people would start commenting. Our cousin Marissa wrote, "Is this about Amanda? Because if it is, didn't she pay your car insurance last winter?" Then Uncle Roy chimed in with something about a loan Dan had never paid back. Then a guy from Dan's old HVAC job posted that Dan had borrowed $800 from him 2 years ago and ghosted. The post got taken down that night, but by then things were already unraveling. They had to cancel a Disney trip they'd been hyping up for months. Their daughter cried for 2 days straight. I know that because my mom told me Dan sold their PS5 on Facebook Marketplace. Carly picked up extra shifts at the salon, then Dan's car got booted. Insurance had lapsed again. He tried to blame Carly, but she told him straight up she was tired of being the only adult in the house. Meanwhile, I focused on Jordan. I signed him up for a robotics club he'd been nervous to join. Bought him a used 3D printer from Craigslist. We started building a little Mars rover together, one tiny plastic gear at a time. One night while we were working on it, Jordan asked me if what Uncle Dan said was true. I asked him what he meant. He said that I'm just average, that I won't finish high school. I didn't even try to hide how much that gutted me. I told him no, he wasn't average. He was exceptional. Not just because he was smart, but because he was thoughtful, curious, kind, everything this world needed more of. He didn't say anything, just kept fiddling with the wheels, his face quiet. Later that night, when he went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time because part of me wondered if I just made everything worse. Not just for Dan, but for his daughter, for her mom, for everyone. But I couldn't shake what I saw in Jordan's eyes that night at dinner, and I wasn't sorry, not one bit. By the end of the second week, the silence was loud. No texts, no calls, no fake apologies. Dan didn't even try to ask for the money back, think he knew better, or maybe he thought if he ignored it long enough, things would fix themselves. They didn't. Carly started working 6 days a week. My niece, who was used to art classes, science fairs, and a structured afternoon schedule, was now spending hours at home alone while Dan looked for work, which, based on his gaming activity and updated STEAM achievements, wasn't going well. I got a call from my mom one afternoon. She said Dan and Carly were fighting loudly. My niece heard everything. Apparently, Dan told Carly she'd have to ask me for help again if they wanted to keep the lights on. He threw something at him. It didn't hit, but my mom said it shattered. A lamp, maybe. I didn't feel bad, not yet, because this wasn't about pride anymore, it was about respect. And if the cost of finally earning it was watching Dan's castle of entitlement collapse, then so be it. But then something happened I wasn't ready for. Jordan came home from school with a drawing. It was supposed to be for a family pride project. Other kids drew houses, pets, parents. Jordan drew me and him standing on a hill. Below us were shadows, 4 of them, no faces, just dark outlines. I asked what they were. He said, "The people who laugh at us." That night, I cried in the bathroom so he wouldn't see because I knew deep down this wasn't just about dinner or money. This had been building for years. Dan had always taken little shots, always acted like my success was some kind of fluke, like I didn't really deserve it. And I'd let it go over and over for the sake of keeping peace, for the sake of appearances, for family. But Jordan saw through all of it, and that drawing told me he'd felt that distance long before his uncle's comment, long before that lasagna dinner. A few days later, I got a call from an unknown number. Who was Dan? He asked if we could talk in person, said he'd meet me anywhere. For a second, I thought about ignoring him, but something in his voice stopped me. Not anger, not sarcasm, just tiredness, like maybe he finally got it. We agreed to meet at a diner halfway between our houses. I didn't tell Jordan. When I showed up, Dan was already there. No food, no drink, just sitting at a booth, staring at the table like it held the answers to his entire life. He looked up and said, "I need to tell you something, and I need to tell Jordan too." I wasn't expecting what came next. I was halfway to the diner when I nearly turned around. Part of me still didn't believe Dan was capable of anything resembling an apology, but something told me this was different. And when I walked in and saw him sitting there, not on his phone, not pretending to be too cool to care, just sitting with his hands clasped like he was praying, I knew something had shifted. I sat down, he didn't even look up at first. Then he said, "I need to tell you something, and I need to tell Jordan too." I waited. He said, "What I said at dinner, I didn't mean it. Or maybe I did, but not because it's true. I said it because I hate how far behind I've fallen. You built something. You've got this quiet, steady life and a kid who actually listens to you, and I'm just out here pretending I'm not drowning." So I said nothing. Then he pulled something out of his jacket, a folded piece of paper. He smoothed it out and placed it on the table between us. It was Jordan's drawing, the one with us standing on the hill in the dark shapes below. "I found this in my daughter's backpack," he said. "She took it from your kitchen. I think she was trying to understand it." "I didn't expect that." Dan pointed at the shadows. "That's me, I know it." And when I saw it, I couldn't stop staring at it. It felt like someone held a mirror up and I finally saw myself. He asked if he could apologize to Jordan in person, not some phone call, not a text, face to face. I told him to come by that evening. No promises, no expectations. He showed up just after 7. Jordan was on the couch doing his math homework. He looked up and when he saw Dan, he paused, but he didn't get up. Dan walked over and stood a few feet away. No speech, no dramatics. Just said, "I said something that hurt you. I was wrong. You're nothing like what I said. You're smart and brave, and you're exactly the kind of person I wish I was when I was your age." Jordan didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Okay," and went back to his math. Dan nodded and left. I didn't expect what came next. 2 days later, I got a notification from LinkedIn. Dan had updated his profile, not just some nonsense update, either. He'd started working a night shift at a warehouse outside the city. 12-hour shifts, manual labor, not glamorous, not something he'd ever brag about. Then I found out from Carly that he picked up a side gig delivering groceries on a borrowed bike. She was stunned, said he hadn't told her until after his 3rd shift. He was exhausted, sore, and dead silent at home most nights. But he wasn't bitter. Not this time. One evening, Jordan and I were driving home from robotics club and saw Dan on the sidewalk with a bag of groceries slung over his shoulder, helmet on, wiping sweat off his face with his sleeve. Jordan just watched him as we passed. Then he said, "Uncle Dan looks different." I said, "He is." Wasn't some big magical moment. There was no dramatic music, no instant redemption, just the slow, clumsy start of someone deciding to be better. Not for attention, not for applause, but because they finally realized they had to. But the real surprise came the next week. The call from Carly came on a Thursday morning while I was packing Jordan's lunch. Her voice sounded different. Not frantic, not drained, just calm. She said, "I think something's changing. I don't know what you said to Dan, but he's trying, really trying." I didn't know what to say. I'd gotten so used to disappointment where my brother was concerned, I wasn't ready to believe it. But then she started listing things off. He'd stopped eating out, sold his gaming rig, picked up extra shifts at the warehouse. They downgraded their phone plan and canceled all their subscription services. Even the sports channels he used to insist were non-negotiable. But the real surprise, he signed up for an HVAC recertification course, nights, 3 times a week, energy-efficient systems and solar panel integration. The kind of work that actually had a future. Then she said something that caught me off guard. He asked if I'd be okay working less just so he could take over with our daughter in the evenings. He said it was time he stepped up as a dad. I just stood there holding a granola bar in one hand, staring out the window. Dan had not only taken accountability, but had started acting like someone who actually wanted to change. Not just to make things easier for himself, but to repair what he'd broken. That weekend, he showed up at my door with his daughter. Jordan answered and just blinked at them like he couldn't believe they were real. They didn't come empty-handed. Dan brought back the Lego kit I'd given his daughter for her birthday last year. This time with an expansion set he bought with his first grocery delivery tips. The kids sat on the floor building for over an hour without fighting or getting bored. I watched from the kitchen while Dan helped them both, carefully separating the pieces, actually listening. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen him look that patient. After the kids drifted off to the couch, Dan stayed. He asked me real questions about my job, about how I handled things alone, about Jordan. He even asked if I'd help him set up a LinkedIn profile that didn't look like it was written by a teenager. Then something I wasn't expecting at all. He asked if he could come with us to Jordan's robotics club finals. Passed. Why? He said because he deserves to have more people cheering for him. I said he does. The day of the competition, Dan showed up early, not just on time early. Brought snacks, bottled water, and a sign that said Geo Jordan in crooked block letters drawn with a thick blue marker. Jordan spotted it from across the room and just stood there stunned, not angry but surprised. After the event, Jordan walked up to Dan. No prompting, no nudging. He said, "Thanks for being here." And Dan said, "Thanks for letting me." Later that night, Carly dropped by after the kids were in bed. She hugged me tight in the doorway and whispered, "I don't know what clicked in him, but something did. I think he finally saw what he was becoming and he didn't like it." I stood there quiet because I knew exactly when it happened. It was the night Jordan drew him as a shadow and Dan saw it, and somehow that hit harder than anything else. What surprised me most, he didn't just change for a week or a month. He kept going. By summer, things looked different. Not just for Dan, but for all of us. He'd passed the first part of his HVAC certification and was already enrolled in the next. He was working full-time hours between 2 jobs and somehow still made time to help his daughter with her science homework and show up at Jordan's robotics meetings whenever he could. He didn't talk about being tired. He didn't complain. He just did what needed to be done. It was strange at first watching him act like a real adult, like a father, like a brother. I caught myself waiting for the mask to slip, for him to make some sarcastic comment or go silent or fall back into his usual patterns. But he didn't. He started calling just to ask how Jordan was doing, not to ask for help, not to guilt me, just to check in. Sometimes he even asked if Jordan wanted to hang out for an hour or two on a Sunday. One time he showed up with a beat-up starter kit for coding microcontrollers. Said he got it cheap from a guy at work and thought Jordan might like to figure it out with him. And the weirdest part, they did figure it out together. Carly called me one night while Dan was at his class. She said, "I keep waiting for it to fall apart, but it's not. He's just becoming someone new." Then she added something I hadn't expected. "You doing what you did, pulling support, standing up for Jordan. That's what shook him awake and it hurt. But it was probably the first time anyone in his life held a real mirror up." It wasn't just the money that changed things. It was being seen clearly for the first time and knowing it wasn't pretty. One weekend, we all ended up at my mom's house again. First time since that dinner, same dining table, same old lasagna recipe. The tension wasn't gone completely, but it wasn't the kind that made your stomach twist. It was more like the quiet rebuilding kind, like everyone knew we were carefully rewriting the rules. Jordan sat next to Dan. They laughed about some dumb joke involving a sensor Dan accidentally fried in their little microcontroller experiment. My niece showed off a clay sculpture she'd made at her new art class. One Carly found and applied for on her own. My mom, for once, wasn't trying to play referee. He just let things be. Midway through dinner, Dan cleared his throat and raised his glass. Just water, no beer, no performance. He said, I wasn't proud of who I was, but I'm trying to be someone Jordan and my daughter can look up to, and I wouldn't have gotten there if Amanda hadn't stood up when she did, even when it meant cutting me off. He turned to me and added, I know I didn't deserve it, but I'm grateful anyway. Nobody clapped, nobody cried, it was just quiet, honest. Later that night, as we were packing up leftovers, Jordan walked up to me while I was loading containers into a bag. He said, Uncle Dan's kind of awesome now. I smiled. Yeah, he kind of is. Then he asked, do you think people can always change or just some people? I told him the truth. Some people don't, but the ones who do, they usually start when someone finally stops protecting their excuses. Dan changed because he hit a wall, but he stayed changed because he wanted to. Because he looked at who he was and decided it wasn't enough. Now when I look at him, I don't see the man who humiliated my son at the dinner table. I see the one who's trying and choosing to be better, and that's the kind of story I didn't think we'd get to tell, but I'm glad.